Hello, and welcome to Vantage Point. I'm Marcia Boyles, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Kathleen Taylor. And Kathleen, I'll remind our viewers that you are the social worker, clinical social worker at the Medical Center.
Yes.
All right. Well, today we're going to be talking about listening. And I should probably explain to our viewers that our last program was telling our stories, telling our personal narratives, and all the benefits that we get from it, particularly as we're aging. And the fact that I got from a friend an email, which I shared with you, and my friend said, I kept waiting and watching your show on storytelling for the other half of the equation. And the other half of the equation, of course, is listening. And we agreed that we hadn't talked much about listening in our past show. So that's what we're going to be doing today. There are so many stories here at Green Spring. We hear them constantly. I paraphrased The Sound of Music by saying the Green Spring hallways are alive with the sound of stories. And who is listening to them, and how are they listening to them? Right. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. Let's begin by talking about categories of information.
Okay. Can I butt in a minute though?
Oh, of course.
Because I definitely want to say we're always so happy to hear from our listeners out there because they're so smart. Yes, absolutely. When somebody is communicating with us, it requires a communicator and it requires a listener. And so, English undergrad that I am, I had to look up the definition of communication. And so it comes from the Latin word, which means to make common or to share, which is exactly what communication is.
Yes.
Simply put, it requires somebody that needs to share information or feelings or thoughts, and
somebody.
So
both.
Well, it requires somebody that wants to share those feelings and somebody who wants to listen to those feelings, a receiver. So that's kind of the basic idea of communication. And again, doing my research, communication is really seen to be an innate human behavior. We're born with it.
All right, so it's a basic need.
It's a basic need, absolutely. And though with humans we're talking mostly about language, we communicate with language, we also communicate with nonverbal means as well. But the point is that it is a human need.
And I suspect it also is many animal. As a biologist,
right,
I suspect that it also is part of animal behavior in many species.
Right. And as a biologist, you know that the needs can be survival related too. I mean, our ability to communicate, when we were living, well, anytime really, is based to a certain extent in our ability to let people know what we need or what we want or where the food is or where the
danger is,
where the bear is hiding,
right,
or whatever. And it's also really relevant to our ability to be social, to build communities and to create societies. So language is all important for those reasons too, or communication. But for our purposes, we're really wanting to talk about communication as meeting that really basic human need that we have to be with another person, to interact with another person. Sort of that cliche, people need people. What is that, a Barbara Streisand song
Barbara
or something?
Streisand, yes.
Yeah.
People who need people.
People who need people. So that's what we want to talk about today is what needs do communication fill, and if we don't have those needs met, how can that affect us?
All right, that is a heavy load. Yes,
that's a lot.
All right. That having been said, thank you very much for that. Gosh, I haven't heard you opine to that degree for a long time.
It's such a good topic,
It is
very important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it just seems to become more and more important as we're aging. I think that's the thing that we're all finding. I mean, it's a validation really of our of our own life story, of our value. I think is really what it's becoming at this stage.
Yep. And many more things that we can talk about.
And many more things that we will talk about. Yep, exactly. All right. Kathleen, we have talked about the fact that there are two categories of communication. Basically, one is being just plain information, and the second are stories. And that's really what we're talking about here, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably want to broaden it a little bit, because before we were talking very specifically about personal narratives. I think how we want to broaden it now is really that whenever we talk to another person, or whenever we share information, feelings, thoughts, then that in itself is meeting that human need to interact with another person. So
even sharing information.
Sharing information, absolutely, at a very kind of, when we start talking about the different levels of listening or communicating, we'll kind of get into that a little bit more. But, you know, even when we're sharing information, it's important that we feel like we're being listened to, you know, that we feel like we're being paid attention to, because that does meet that need, you know, of validation, as you said, even something that simple.
Yes, and I think men and women tend to communicate slightly differently. I think the men, at least overhearing them sitting in the lobby, tend to be more informational than women do. So I think there's a slight difference, but I think the end result, as really you're pointing out here, is exactly the same.
Yep.
All right. You want to take it from here?
Oh, okay. Well, I think that the first thing that we want to talk about is what is that human need that is met through communication. And I think we talked about a lot of different things, but certainly it's the idea of being recognized, you know, being seen as a person who has value, as a person who has something to offer. It's about feeling connected, that you fit in, that you belong at some level. Is
this on the part of both the teller and the listener?
Yeah. I mean, I think that when the listener recognizes the person, then they're kind of affirming that is part of the communication, that, you know, the person, if they're a good listener, I mean, that's a caveat too. You can have somebody who's not necessarily really listening, which can kind of not give you the opposite feeling, you know, that you're not being paid attention to, that people don't care about you. But we hope we can get sort of across some of the good listening part. But it really is, I think, with the idea of sharing and commonality that the Latin definition was about, was just the idea that in communicating we get a sense of what we share with the other person, that we have that commonality, that we can meet in that space together, and when we communicate with each other, we're not alone, and we're not, you know, we're same, we're not different so much. And that's really important for human beings.
A shared humanity, as it were.
Absolutely.
Certainly that's the feeling.
Yeah.
You get on both listening and telling.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, but, you know, not feeling alone, not feeling, you know, that you are out there all by yourself, and that you don't have the ability to reach out and have somebody who can kind of listen and really kind of make you feel better at some level, that you aren't in it by yourself.
I don't think there's any question about it, and certainly everybody at some point or another self-isolates for one reason or another. And certainly the feeling that one gets when you become isolated is not feeling part of any community, feeling like you don't fit in, It's kind of a devastating feeling, I think.
Right. Yeah, so we had talked about the positives of communication and how that really does contribute to a sense of overall well-being,
Yes.
more satisfaction with your life. And I mean, it has a lot of positive aspects to it. The opposite of that is what happens if you don't have that communication. And if, as you said, sometimes it can be about the person having things happen, life situations that they tend to maybe withdraw a little bit.
Yes. And in some cases, it's a physical thing.
They're
simply
physically unable to get out so much. But I think that certainly there's a disruption to a person's life when they're not able to interact with other people. They tend to feel very disconnected. And it's weird what we do to ourselves when we feel disconnected or alone. We tend to feel like there's something wrong with us. Since we are alone, people must not want to be near us because there's something wrong with us. I don't know what that is about people, but they tend to sort of blame themselves when they feel alone.
Well, I think one's perspective can get totally skewed.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true. I just always say that too much time spent in your own head is a dangerous thing, because you do lose perspective. It's really easy to, have your thoughts and behaviors, if they're kind of, in a downward spiral, to just keep spiraling, and you don't have any ability to gauge because you don't have any way to bounce this off of anybody else. So that's probably the most important thing, I think, when it comes to communicating with people. Sometimes is just that they give you another perspective. And if they're a really good friend, they go, whoa.
Right. Where are you headed
Where
with
are you
this?
going with
Yes.
this? Do you think maybe there's another way of looking at this, for example? So yeah, that's definitely the most important part of that whole communication interaction.
A number of years ago, I was working with the historically black colleges and all over the South, and most of them are in little tiny towns like Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and Monroe, Louisiana. And I would be down in those little tiny towns for sometimes weeks at a time. And of course, we didn't have cell phones in those days, so I couldn't even call my office. And I would sometimes just get very paranoid when I was, my third week or fourth week on the road.
Yeah.
So I experienced it very much what you're talking about
right.
here, just
you
total
need that,
loss of perspective.
Yeah, you need those people that you trust, I think,
Yes.
to ground you a little bit. And I guess this would be a point where we could maybe bring up the different levels of communication.
Yes. I think that would be appropriate.
Oh, you want me to go?
Yes.
Okay. So the first one is just really paying attention, which is it seems like a no-brainer.
It does.
And it seems like really, really simple, but like we were talking about earlier, if you're talking to somebody and they're looking around, or if they're a young person, or maybe not even so young, on their cell phone,
right. Exactly.
checking their messages, or just not seeming really there, then that can be pretty off-putting.
Yes, I don't think there's any question about it. I think in a way it's worse than than not
having
anybody there.
That feels like rejection, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So I think and that's a lot of that is actually, less about what somebody's saying to you and more about the meta communication that I like to talk about, which is the nonverbals, which is, what the body language is, what is the person's face doing.
I remember reading years ago that there's a certain percentage of body language versus, or meta as you're calling it, and verbal, and I don't remember what it is. Do you?
Oh, yeah, it's like 90% nonverbal and 10% verbal or something.
It was astonishing.
That's a great point to bring up, because I think people miss that sometimes, is they think if they
Right.
say okay, yes,
Right.
Then
That's enough.
then that's enough. But like eye contact, it's so it's so simple,
Yes.
but on the other hand. So that's the first level. Just hopefully you're able to find somebody that will engage in communication with you who will pay attention.
Yes.
That would be great.
Yes.
The next level is understanding that you're actually getting feedback from that person, that they're listening and they're hearing what you're saying.
And that can be both verbal and
Yeah.
body language.
Yeah, but I do think that gets a little bit more into the verbal. I mean, it can be
Yes.
just like nodding your head, is certainly, yes, tell me more, those kinds of things. And leaning forward, of course, that would be something that would help people to feel that the person was engaged with them.
And eye contact, as
And
you're
eye contact
pointing
for
out.
sure, and also, understanding: are they asking questions? Are they, seeming to be, paying enough attention that they're understanding what you're saying? That they're going, oh, what was that like? Or
Yeah, it's a dialogue rather
it
than...
becomes yeah, exactly. That you're not just talking to yourself at that point. You're actually getting. The communication loop is going between you and that other person and back to you again. So that's
Yes.
the whole process of communication. And then, and I think when I was thinking about there's also that shared understanding that could come at this point, that there's some common ground then that you might have discovered in this communication. It's like, oh yeah, that happened to me once too. Right. So you can, that, and that's really nice, because that's where you really start to feel, that there's a closeness there, more close, as people are sharing their own experiences with each other. And then I think the idea of active listening, that's more, something that we talk about when we're talking about, intentional communication. But certainly, if you're really listening and you're really understanding, then you're not only just listening to the facts, the details of the story, or the details of the, whatever information the person is trying to convey, but you're also listening for the emotional tone. You're thinking a little bit more and reacting a little bit more to, is this person angry right now? Is something bothering him or her? Is there something, is she feeling happy, pleased? What is the person's mood as they tell this information?
All right. How does this story, these facts, make that person feel?
Yeah, and I think you're the people that you're closest to, your really good friends are certainly more in tune with you at that level. It's a lot to expect that somebody that you're meeting with, talking to, just casually, or in a situation like the dining room, where it's really hard to have much of a really meaningful conversation. The expectations of communication are altered depending on the setting, for sure.
Of course.
But if you're having a conversation with somebody that you feel relatively close to, then I think that's going to potentially come up more often, that the person is recognizing that you are having a pleasant or an unpleasant experience, whatever it is.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we know our friends well enough to know that even a small amount of change in their in the way they're telling a story may convey emotions.
Right. And if you notice that, is that something that you would kind of relate back to them?
Well, I think it would depend entirely on the extent of the emotion and what the circumstances were. But certainly it registers. And
but how does that other person know that it registers if you don't say, hey, I noticed that you look like you're kind of upset about that, or hey, it really looks like you had a great time. You really must have had a good time. You're smiling. You're laughing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would tend not to do that, but you're saying that's a good, that kind of feedback is a good thing.
Yeah, I think it is, just because that's just another level of understanding what the person is experiencing.
Acknowledging it, yes, of course.
Yeah, but you don't do that with everybody, clearly.
No, and I think probably body language. I mean, you may look like, I'm noticing what you're doing, and it may be a look rather than a verbal response.
Absolutely. And then the level of the final, I don't know if it's the final, but it's where I stopped was the idea. I could have kept going, maybe different levels, but the idea of a therapeutic communication.
Now tell me what you mean by that.
Well, mostly I probably mean it as a professional definition of therapeutic communication or therapeutic dialogue, and that's where. Again, a trained professional is going to be supporting that person in really understanding what they're feeling, what they're thinking, how they're acting, in order for them to really, really understand what their responses are, in order for them to be able to put them into some kind of context that will help them identify what their needs are, and then be able to work to getting their needs met. So a lot of people. So I know you're looking. I see you looking puzzled at me. That is about it's certainly about the all the nonverbals, and also what the person's saying. But how much do they really pay attention to what they're saying? It's like, somebody just said to me the other day, I'm talking to myself, but I'm not listening to myself.
Is that right? Oh, that's a wonderful
And that's really
sentence.
smart, because we
it.
talk to ourselves a lot. We say things
Right.
in our heads or out loud, but we're not paying attention to what they mean or how we mean them. And so sometimes we can get kind of off track a little bit. And so with the therapeutic dialogue, that allows that person to really, well, what do you mean when you say that? And how is that connected to something else?
Are you asking them directly, what do you mean by that, and how?
Sometimes.
All right.
Yeah, because it's, I think I've talked about this before. Some of these terms are kind of weird, but we talk about, unpacking the experience or peeling the onion, but you really go past the superficial level of the word, even, to really find out what does that word mean to them. So I'm sad. Well, let's go farther into that. Let's not just stay with sad, because words mean different things to everybody.
Of course.
And they're always tied to personal experiences. So where's that sadness coming from? And just really going very deeply into the idea of understanding that person, and then giving them the feedback to help them understand themselves better, in order for them to see what they might change, maybe adjust in the way that they think or the way they feel or the way that they act, that's going to allow them to have a better life.
All right. That's a tall order.
Yeah, I mean, it's work. It's definitely work. It's not magic in any kind of way. It's in it. But the best part about it is there's just really a different kind of communication. It's the same basic principles of communication taken to a little bit of a different level.
All right. There's no sorcery.
No, no, not at all.
And I think sometimes we think of therapy as being a totally different kind of communication, and you're saying it really isn't.
It really isn't. It really isn't. And I think that at the most basic level, therapy is just about coming in and having a really good conversation with someone who is listening to you really well.
Yes, and you would do it well.
Oh, thanks.
I heard you.
Thank you.
Kathleen, one of the things that I had mentioned to you in my last email was that I think one of the most powerful tools in listening is silence. There, of course, the silence may be accompanied by body language or expression that is revealing, but I think it can be a very, very powerful tool.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as you don't let it go on too long. I mean, there's like, if there's silence and then there's more silence, then it kind of
Becomes awkward.
very awkward.
Yes.
But absolutely, as they say, no communication is communicating too. So,
Yes.
So you're saying something with your silence,
You're saying a lot sometimes with your silence.
but you do want to be sure that that person is receiving the silence in the way that you intended it, because,
yes.
you know, if your silence is, I'm being quiet because I just feel like I want to give you the space to be able to follow that thought longer, and I'm just here to listen. Or, you know, the silence feels like you said, awkward, you know, like it's like, how come they're not reacting to me? And you can pick up on that, and then you can
Yes,
fix that.
Exactly. And I think it is effective in I'm being silent because I'm thinking about what you're saying, which is what is the way I would see it being used.
Yeah, but absolutely, I think that we aren't probably quiet as much as we could be, and you also know people that when they're talking, you're talking, you know, you can see they're already thinking about what they're going to say. So then it becomes a little bit competitive, and that. So we do. I mean, that's just a great point. That, you know, just being present sometimes and listening is the best thing you can do for a friend.
I think so too, and they for us.
Absolutely.
I think we talked a little bit about, you and I, in preparing for this show. We talked a little bit about our responsibility.
Yeah.
In terms of listening.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a human kindness, I think.
I do too.
To listen. If you and as you noted, I think it's happening all the time out in our community.
I don't think there's any question about it, that both telling and listening is going on. And there are people in this community that I think we all know that are especially good listeners.
Yeah.
And they seem especially kind sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think some people are very intentional, you know, that they really do see that as their responsibility.
I think so too.
But not everybody can be that person. You know, there are people that just, you know, sort of can't slow down enough to really be able to take that role on, and that's fine too. You got to know yourself. So if you're not, you know, if you're not a born listener or a intentional listener, then that's okay. There's no judgment here at all.
Right.
And sometimes, like you said, with you know, the guys, you know, sort of talking more factually, you know, it really is the camaraderie there a lot of times more than what's actually being said. You know, when the men are together and you said they were more factual, but
Well, they seem to be almost entirely factual.
yeah, but they're still together as a group.
They are.
They're enjoying each other.
And they're respectful of each other. I mean, that becomes very clear. They stop and they let the other person,
Yeah.
you know, tell their facts.
Yeah,
And
but there's there's a common ground there. You know, whatever it is, needs are being met. You know, surprisingly, you know, even when somebody's talking about, you know, whatever, you know.
no, I think they must. I mean, they clearly are enjoying it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Again, it's just there are gender differences.
Yep. Time for us to quit.
I see that.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
I know.